Uh, Good evening, everyone. My name is Binto George. I am the Vice Chair of IEEE Iowa Illinois section, Computer Society chapter. Happy to meet you all. Today's evening, this talk is a very interesting talk, navigating cybersecurity and systemic risk in a rapidly advancing technological landscape by Dr. John Johnson. This webinar is recorded, just so you know. So besides Iowa Illinois section, Computer Society chapter, this talk is also co-hosted by Iowa Illinois section, Southeastern Michigan section of Computer Society chapter, and Central Iowa section Computer Society chapter and Central Iowa section. So today's talk is for about 45 minutes with Q&A at the end. Your mic is muted by default, so you may raise your hand or use the chat or DM to ask questions. At some point, a poll will be launched, so you can tell whether you are an IEEE member, an IEEE Computer Society member, or both. I would like to welcome our speaker, Dr. John Johnson. John is the chair of the Iowa Illinois CS chapter and has been an IEEE volunteer for more than 20 years. His background is in cybersecurity, started about 30 years ago at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And he has since worked for John Deere, Deloitte, Campbell Soup Company, and now he has his own security team, Align Security. John also founded Dozen Institute and Concord Cybersecurity Conference. He has taught cybersecurity at various universities since 2001. John is a director for ISSA International, and he serves on advisory boards and has been a track judge for RSA conference since 2008. Please join me in welcoming Dr. John D. Johnson. John, take it away.
Good day, good evening, good morning. I think we're dealing with region 4, right? So we probably are all in the evening category. I'm excited about this topic, and I'll kind of give you a quick overview. My contact information is on the slide if anybody wants to reach out. We will post the slides and the video after the webinar. One of the things that I did this year is I had an opportunity to take a free online course from Princeton University, and it was on systemic risk, global systemic risk. And I've always been fascinated about just
from wallstreetoasis.com. Systemic risk refers to the possibility of a failure of a specific
Let me turn off my
financial system instead of the loss of a single component, such as the financial sector, that can lead to nationwide or global economic instability.
Well, AI is in action.
Sorry about that. I had Google or Alexa, one of them, whatever's over there, started just talking, and I didn't want it to interrupt. But that's an example of something that, we know that can happen. And often we discount the risk of something happening with our technology. And so systemic risk, we were looking at global supply chains and the Gulf of Hormuz and COVID and all these different things that were unlikely, but when they occur, especially when there's a confluence of events that occur at the same time, then you can have cascading failures, and it can lead to a catastrophic results. And so, this allows me to take a look at these advancing technologies that I'm really interested in, like AI and quantum computing and so on, and try to put it in the context of risk. right. So I think most of you probably are familiar with Donald Rumsfeld's quote, "There are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns." That's to say, we know there are some things we do not know, but there are also unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know we don't know. And that's kind of the view that I have when you have these very complex, large, global systems of systems that are all interconnected. And it can be very daunting to figure out, what do we have to really be worried about? You know, as an example, the iPhone, boy, when did it come out? In around 2008, 2007, and somewhere around there. And all of a sudden now, everybody is looking down at their phone when they cross the street. And hopefully the Waymo autonomous taxi doesn't hit them. So in risk management, we have to deal with this uncertainty. It's difficult, and particularly with cybersecurity, to quantify risk. When we think about the actuarial tables that go back over 100 years for, building fires and all these other things that you insure against, floods and, all of this, you have much more of, you have a very large data set. And when you get to something that's sort of, cybersecurity really is a young field. And the odds of this black swan event, which I'll talk about in a minute, happening can be very, very rare. But if you're not looking for it, you're not going to see it until it hits you. Quantifying risk in cybersecurity, therefore, it's difficult to measure it. You need to have metrics. You need to quantify it as best you can. But sometimes you have really big error bars, right? And so this is just an example of the factors that go into assessing risk. This is an example of a risk model from the FAIR Institute. And the different things that you can calculate, and you can see here they have secondary loss. So it's not just the direct financial loss, or you lost a building, you lost, shareholder value. It's the secondary loss is taken into account. But just like the supply chain, you've got this chain of everybody who's working with your company. And so really you have, third order, fourth order, you have the risk is shared with a lot of others that you do business with. So, but it's important to have a model for at least looking at risk, depending upon the context of what type of risk you're looking for. So black swans is a term that was coined by Nassim Taleb, and this book's been out for, boy, I think at least a decade. I think there's a second version out. But the black swan event was actually, he tells the story in the book about finding a black swan. What are the odds of finding a black swan? That's very unusual. Well, maybe if you live in Australia on this particular river, or if you understand the genetics that go into having a swan that's black instead of white, you realize that this is, it's very unpredictable, but it's a possibility. And if you don't have it on your radar, then you really can't protect against it. Now, I don't think that you have to worry about black swans, but you have other events that might occur. And, we can mention COVID, or we can talk about the, some of the recent, you know, computer attacks that have been attacking, whether it's the telephone system or ransomware at your company. These are things that are not any longer black swans, because we kind of know if these other guys are getting it, we'd better be watching for it ourselves. But there are events that are very uncommon and maybe very hard to predict. Then we have gray rhinos, and I don't know the story on the gray rhinos, but they're highly probable. They're high impact if they occur, and they're often discounted and neglected. Oh, that won't happen to us. And I've certainly seen that kind of confirmation bias with executives, places that I've worked before, saying, well, that might happen to the competition, but it's not going to happen to us. And so the gray rhinos, on the other hand, are predictable, right? These are known risks. They're not just, out of the blue. They do happen. They can have a high impact, and they're often overlooked until they become critical. So I just have some examples here. A major cyber attack that compromises the global financial system. I have to not touch my mouse while I'm talking. A pandemic. We just had one of those recently. We hope we don't have another. Natural disasters, floods, a tsunami that hit the nuclear plant in Japan in 2009. And so gray rhino events can be really impactful. A major economic downturn, such as the housing bubble burst and caused a recession in 2009. An attack on power grids, critical infrastructure, or transportation systems. And we already mentioned the pandemic. The pandemic just fits every category. It's something that we never expected, but I would hope that that's on our radar now after what happened recently. So both of these require strategies. You have to think beyond conventional data and models. You have to have scenario planning and threat modeling. You have to be able to get it onto your radar. If you don't recognize, if you don't know, you don't know it, then you're not going to be properly preparing, and being resilient to survive whatever that is, if it does happen. And then with the gray rhinos, proactive risk assessments and mitigation strategies. And I think that really applies to both types of events. So these are just, examples of events, because gray rhinos and black swans are something that we've kind of talked about in the industry since these books were written a decade or so ago. And what we're dealing with when we have a system of systems is a lot of complexity. Here you can see kind of a network with nodes and connections, and some nodes have a lot of connections, and some nodes are really sparse, and sometimes you get a cluster of nodes that only has a couple of external connections, and so obviously those would be weak points in that network. And so we're not talking necessarily about a data network. It could be a human network. It could be communication. It could be LinkedIn and social media, right? All of these interconnected networks have agents, we'll call them, may represent cells, species, individuals, organizations, markets, and technological systems. These systems of systems, as our technology moves forward, are getting larger and more complex. And the control tends to be highly dispersed and decentralized. It's not, there's not one guiding hand from the outside that is setting the rules and managing the system, especially when it's a global system. And so the other thing, when you have these complex systems of systems, as I'm calling them, you find that you've got all these interactions. It's too complicated for, you know, a human to really know how all these things work. When I started in cybersecurity, it wasn't called cybersecurity. I was a security manager and network manager. I think that was probably the key role that I had, was managing the network and putting in a big network upgrade at Los Alamos. But back then, you had to know all of IT. You had to be very broad in your knowledge. You kind of had to be a jack of all trades, IT-wise. We were learning about security, and you know, when there was no textbook on it, and so where was I going? Oh, when we started, we had to have all these things. Now, people, you know, students will go into cybersecurity as a major. They will be much more narrowly focused on, you know, they want to be an analyst, they want to be a SOC analyst, they want to be a pen tester, you know, they don't care about GRC, you know, governance, right? They don't care about policies and the other stuff. They want to do this thing over here. And nowadays you can get very narrow in your knowledge, but as technology advances, nobody can be an expert at all of the technologies. Things are just changing. I don't want to say daily, you know, by the second. These what I've heard them called is exponential technologies, like how AI is really taking off exponentially the past couple of years. And so we're going to have more and more of these complex systems of systems. And they kind of have their own way of living and existing and changing. And the order is emergent typically for these systems. We don't really realize how it's going to work out until it, you know, gets out there into the hands of the consumer. The system's history is, for the most part, irreversible because of the complex interconnectedness, and the system's future is often unpredictable. And all of this complexity leads to additional risk. If I don't have a view to everything that's going on a single pane of glass, well, I may miss something. If I don't have somebody dedicated to that function watching that, and we don't have oversight, somebody might change something and then they didn't go through change management, or it wasn't caught, and it causes a, you know, hopefully a problem that can be fixed. But in these very complex systems, you're not sure how things are going to follow. The systems are reliant on other systems, right? That's the systems of systems. And so I have a friend, Wolfgang Gorlich, who said this several years ago. The following is my rule of thumb. For every 1,000 lines of code, on average, at least one code level bug exists. For every 20 code level bugs, at least one is a security vulnerability. And for every 10 vulnerabilities, at least one is exploitable. It may be a 0 day that we don't realize is in the code. And we know that applications have more and more lines of code, millions of lines of code. So you can't put out Microsoft Office or even add functionality to it without knowing that you're going to introduce some bugs. And of course, that led to this monthly Microsoft patch cycle. So this is one way of thinking about complexity. This circuit on the left isn't complex, right? You have a battery and a light bulb, and you have a switch. This one on the right is pretty complex, all right? So how difficult is it for a person to really know everything that's going and where all the electrons are flowing in this diagram? Oh, sorry. You know, South Park is kind of this idealistic mountain town in Colorado with fun-loving kids, and it's a small community. And when you're in a small community, you might know everybody. You know, for most of human history, that's how communities were. Now look at New York City. Boy, do you know what's going on in every window in New York City? Do you know where all the pipes connect and all the data lines go and all the electricity where it comes from? And you know, then there's shipping and trains and planes and all kinds of things. Very complicated, right? A big city, tens of millions of people living in these cities. It's something that's beyond really having total understanding. I mean, you can try, and it's good to have good understanding if that's where you live. But you know, the person who, you know, the plumber doesn't necessarily know, you know, the protocols that the fireman has to know. So when we have big systems, we're going to have some systemic risk. That's risk that's inherent to a system. It's different than systematic, right? Which is sort of follows a procedure. Systemic is kind of just inherent. And it refers to the potential for a disturbance at a single entity or component within a system to trigger widespread instability or collapse across the entire system. This type of risk is particularly relevant in interconnected systems such as financial markets, supply chains, and global ecosystems, and of course, the internet. And so you have interconnectedness. Small disruptions can be amplified through the network, and the effects are often nonlinear. So the financial systems are an example. We talked about the banking collapse in 2009. Didn't happen to just a single bank. Due to millions of connections each bank had, the failure of each major institution had spillover effects on additional institutions around the world, like a disease contagion propagating. And so when you have the failure of a major financial institution, it can lead to a cascade of failures across the sector. So this is a good book. I recommend. You have in global systemic risk some different components. You know, these are large, complicated, interconnected systems, and there's a lot of tight coupling in these systems. You know, for example, our global economy. And so all of this information, money, goods, and services have to flow. And when you're a business, you want to increase your efficiency, right? You'd like to have higher profit margins. Why do I need to have two firewalls if one will suffice? And so in a large global system, or just any large complex system of systems, if you lack redundancy, if you remember the image that I had with the interconnected network, if you have single points of failure or lack of redundancy, that means you're less resilient. Now, you may save money, it may be more efficient, but if something bad does happen, perhaps because you didn't know to look for it or you just didn't look for it, then you're more at risk of a critical failure and something that can cascade and potentially put your company out of business. And so efficiency is short-term optimization, and resilience is long-term. And resilience costs a little bit more, but it really depends the environment, the type of systems that you're working in. Is this something where you have any control that you can put mitigating factors in place to better manage that risk once you identify it? So if I shift over, and I'm not going to really talk about the cybersecurity threat landscape too much, but some key trends in 2024 include the rise of generative AI, large language models, lots of benefits, but also a lot of unknowns. For example, is there an attack that can extract the intellectual property that your company typed into ChatGPT? How do you protect that? Geopolitical tensions, Ukraine, Israel, and then we have our disagreements, trade disagreements, and otherwise with China. China and Russia are both. They don't seem to have a problem with attacking, U.S. businesses and stealing intellectual property. Third-party risks. We have the supply chain, all the vendors, all the cloud services that you have. The cloud has some great efficiencies, right? But when you put everything into Amazon, and I won't tell you where this story came from, but an admin named Joe, let's call him, was working for this company, and they had just put their servers into Amazon or Google, maybe it was Microsoft, I don't know, I think it was AWS, but regardless, they're all pretty similar. The procedures for spinning up a VM were different than in the on-premises data center. So all the procedures had been written for on-prem, and now that they're in the cloud, things work differently. And so they can't just spin something up and then go change the default password. And so they were finding that they were getting hacked before they ever had a chance to do anything, as soon as they turn it on. And that was just because of the architecture of this cloud service. Insider threats and the cyber skills shortage. And so there are a lot of things that drive the increase in cybersecurity threats. One of them I want to talk about, I'm sorry about this. My mouse is very sensitive. One of these is the rapid change of technology. We have all of these technologies like AI and chips getting smaller. Did you see NVIDIA's AI supercomputer that you can hold in your hand? Jensen just announced this week. Economic instability. There's a belief, I think, with a lot of attackers out there that if they're in a country that doesn't have extradition whatever the jurisdiction is that they're in, if they can't be brought back to face justice in the US, they figure, it's not a big deal. So when we were kids, I imagine many of us, if you wanted to break into my home and steal my financial documents, you had to walk up to the door. You had to see if the door was locked, right? That's not the way it works now. Now with technology, again, this is another magnifier, amplifier, all this interconnectedness. You need to exploit one of these bugs in one of these massive applications that's out there, and then you're on my computer and you have access to all my documents. And so, it's difficult. Attribution is difficult, and then, finding a way to enforce things is difficult on a global scale. And so computer technology is advancing. We'll talk about that in a minute. Economic barriers continue to drop. If you go on the dark web, you can rent a botnet for $50. You can use cryptocurrency. You can use Monero, the privacy cryptocurrency that's supposed to do a better job of maintaining privacy. But you can go onto the dark web. You can just leverage the brain power of experts. And this is the new script kiddie of the 2020s. As soon as something gets developed, within months, it's now commoditized and available with a discount code on the dark web. And then we have another driver of threats is deep fakes and disinformation. All of this AI is great. It allows me to summarize a video that I want to watch, but I don't want to sit there for 3 hours. So give me the bullets, right? That's great. AI, when it's used to impersonate politicians or celebrities or your husband or wife, is not a good thing, or your kids. And so there are always unintended uses to any technology that we develop. But when everything's interconnected in a big system of system, then things can cascade and really get out of hand. So let me just, this is an example of, just a curve that's showing all of the advancing technologies that have been accelerating, coming up to the early 2000s. Which one do I want to read here? I'm not going to read them all. When you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck. When you invent the plane, you also invent the plane crash. So people need to be thinking about it. And if it's something that you feel might intersect with what your company does or with your personal life, then spend the time to figure out how can this manifest and what can I do about it. Here, we also didn't have a lot of people for most of human history, right? I mean, just you look at the last century or two, and we're now up over 7 billion, approaching 8 billion people on the planet, if I have my numbers right. And so you got more people, and you've got more devices that are connected. This is enterprise IoT. And we're looking here at spending, enterprise spend on IoT, going up and up and up. And the connected devices, IoT, tens of billions of these, year after year after year. And I think that this number is probably low, because in another few years, people are going to really start to say, oh, well, there's a benefit to this technology. I want to have it, and I want it to be interconnected so that it can do more with AI, for example, or have access to more data. And in the last 3 years, we've created more data than in all of human history. And so we got data, we've got, the technology is moving, we have more people, we have more things connected, more complexity. And look at the cost of, computing power, storage, and bandwidth. In the 90s, it was pretty expensive. I remember when a 1 megabyte, really dating me, hard drive, external hard drive for a computer was a couple $1,000s. And of course, if you go back into the 80s and earlier, it could have been a lot more. Now we have an AI supercomputer with teraflops in your hand, according to NVIDIA. And so AI has been referred to as a Cambrian explosion that's disrupting virtually all sectors. And this is definitely an exponentially accelerating technology. But let's think about some other technologies, just to get them out there. We have biology. If you think about, and I don't know why I like to think about how things could go bad, but if you think about biology and genetics, there's a lot of really, really bad things people could do with it, but also a lot of really good things, right? When you take AI and you combine it with this, you're going to be able to fold proteins and figure out, oh, this is how we can contain COVID. This is how we can cure cancer. This is how, and so it's really going to be amazing in the next couple of decades, all of the good things that we can do with biology and genetics. But at the same time, in China, even though they don't support it, there's going to be a lab in China where people are cloning people, not sheep. And so we're going to see personalized medicine, biohacking. You'll be able to, there's the guy, I forget his name, Jordan something, who is the billionaire who's going to, who's genetically and through biology, making himself younger so that he doesn't age. Of course, when you think about it, talking about good and bad, that's when you have sort of the bad side to that coin is we're not necessarily thinking about what happens when 90% of humans live to 100. Nanotechnology. We've been seeing a lot of advances with nanotechnology, and I can just see, in particular medicine, being able to deliver targeted payloads where you want them in the body. Advanced materials. I really would like to see a space elevator someday. And the nanofibers, something that's very, 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 very strong yet flexible, is something that will be very valuable, very useful, but in all of these different sectors. Quantum computing. Even if you don't understand, scientists don't understand really what's under quantum mechanics. We just know it works really well. And so quantum computing is there looking at all the possible answers between 0 and 1 in order to speed up good parallelized or parallelizable problems. An example, the traveling salesman problem. And so just this week, Google's unveiling of its quantum chip Willow marks a significant milestone. Willow solved a complex computational program in under 5 minutes, a task that would take current traditional supercomputers 10 septillion years. And it was able to do it in 5 minutes. And so a big problem that this leads to is, post-quantum cryptography. How, if all these ciphers are going to be able to be broken from quantum computing, then how do we maintain privacy into the future? And then we have quantum entanglement as one way to maybe have information traveling from one to another of a entangled pair of particles and over great distances. And that's something that would definitely, unless you had access to those, you wouldn't be able to, expose the secrets. And then robotics and robotic processes, automation. A lot of really great things that are going on and projected into the future. About a month and a half ago, I heard Elon Musk speaking, and this was right before I gave the previous version of this talk for the Red River Valley section. And Elon Musk said 10 billion humanoid robots by 2040, and there'll be about 20 to 25,000 apiece. And they'll be able to autonomously do tasks, not like the Roomba, right? Just knows how to vacuum your floor. And they are getting better. They have more technology to map out your room and, not, vacuum the cat. But this is really, the things we sometimes don't like billionaires, but they can go out there and well, I'm going to put up a reusable spacecraft. I'm going to have an autonomous vehicle. I'm going to, put sensors in the brain with a neural link and all these things. And, Elon is maybe a little crazy at times. But if we just waited for governments to do research and come up with things and engineer and then deliver that to consumers, it's a much longer product cycle. So let's get back to risk. I like to think of the confluence of technologies, because if you have AI and quantum, right, or if you have, AI and medicine, all these different things that you can mix and match, you don't know exactly what advancement is going to now support advancement in this other technology, and you'll see something new that you didn't expect. And we know that all this new technology can have a downside of things that you didn't predict or that the designers didn't account for. So when you have multiple interdependent systems that have failures, you can have a cascading effect that leads to global systemic collapse. Due to the increasing interdependence and the desire for efficiency, especially cost efficiency, and the ever-growing complexity of systems, we're going to see more cybersecurity risk. And we're going to have more failures, whether they're intentional or whether they're due to error, human error, a mistake. But boom, it took down the power grid in this sector. So what drives these spikes? I think that it's the technologies are at the right spot, and it's the right place and the right time, and this other technology has something to add. And boom, you've got the iPhone or you've got ChatGPT. And I think it's much harder to predict when you think about the multiple technologies that obviously influence one another. And of course, the power grid is, you know, we talk about cascading failures, this always comes to mind. How can we understand these better? We probably need to be resilient. It's hard to predict things. The quote from Bill Gates here, we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. So don't be lulled into inaction. So I want to finish up, have some time for questions. What can we do about this? Well, we can do a better job of identifying risk, and that can be at all levels. That can be at an industry level, it can be at a government level, it can be at a corporate level, it can be at a personal level. You're not going to be a deep expert on everything. In some cases, your company probably is now looking like data scientists a few years ago. Now they're looking for AI experts, right? So it's important to have experts that you can rely on, whether they're an industry council or within your own company. When you have modular and the nodes that are in different colors on the right, some modules have dense connections, but there are sparse connections between nodes in different modules. And so if you can isolate part of the system, it's much less likely that you'll have a cascading critical failure. And of course, in security, we always talk about layered security. You know, the Bayes equation. The having layers, don't just rely on one layer, have two. Don't just rely on one load balancer, have two. I mean, I guess inherently you have to have two at least for a load balancer, right? Because you're balancing between the two. And then feedback loops are important. You've got a feedback loop in your toilet. Otherwise, it would overflow every time you flush, right? When it gets up to a certain level, it stops. That's a very physical feedback loop that probably came from, you know, the Greeks thousands of years ago. We can also look at standards, frameworks, and the type of strategic oversight that we need from a higher level. All right, so this is for you to take home and read. There are a lot of things that we can do with regulations, but regulations are not a silver bullet. They can help in the most egregious cases or to give oversight and guidance, but they're not going to prevent, otherwise they'd be too stifling. And we saw that in the 90s with regulations around the use of cryptography. So, you know, the question is always, will we end up in utopia or dystopia? And I think we'll probably have a lot of good things and but we'll have bad stuff that happens once in a while because of our technology. So stay informed, listen to the experts, pay attention. Don't bury your head in the sand and go, what's this AI thing in 10 years? Perform threat modeling. Have what-if scenarios. Well, we're concerned about this and we're watching this, but what if this happens? How would we deal with the repercussions? How would we insulate ourselves, or how would we protect ourselves? Invest in a little more resilience to prevent those cascading failures from preventing a collapse that causes your company to go out of business, or does physical harm. There's a lot of crossover between the cyber and physical these days. And the bottom line is, these may be beyond the control of any individual organization. You know, you may not be able to prevent it, but maybe you can at least protect your company better by having that knowledge. And, you know, there are ways to transfer risk I mentioned, such as insurance. So in the slides, I do have some addendums that you can take a look at that I think are interesting global systemic risk scenarios. And I have some resources that you can reference. And these are all from OODA Loop. And so OODA has been doing reports mostly on cybersecurity, but also on cybersecurity and technology. And so I have some really good resources there. So that is the end of my presentation. I'm just 5 minutes late, which was good because I think in Rockford, I think I went on an hour and 15 minutes. So, but we had a lot of interactive questions. So if anybody has questions, please type them into the Q&A window. I don't see anything in the Q&A window at this point.
While waiting for the questions, if I could ask you one question.
Sure.
How concerned are you about the AI consuming synthetic data? For instance, like suppose somebody is coming with a code that is supposed to patch something that's actually a code to create a backdoor, something like that. AI gets trained on those things.
Well, I think we're probably most all familiar with when computer vision was being used for vehicles initially. And this is just going back to, not too much, maybe 2015, 16, somewhere around there. You would find that you could put black tape on a stop sign. It still says stop. A human being looks at that and stops their vehicle. But now the Waymo or Tesla or whatever says, oh, that's not a stop sign. It just goes right through it. And that's a really cheap trick to fool the vehicle, the computer vision. But it's if you train something on data. Another example, in Las Vegas, they were going to put on a show at CES, but they'd done all the computer vision training in like Seattle. And the sun is different in Las Vegas. And so the shadows are different and the whole thing is different. Their data set was for Seattle. So when they get to Las Vegas, they had a very narrow data set and they had to retrain the computer vision. But when you talk about, synthetic data and poisoning the well, I really feel that this is a big risk. And, am I on the black screen here? I can get rid of that. It's a big risk because just like repositories, like, GitHub and things where somebody or code libraries, right? They put up some version of code and all of a sudden a lot of people download it, or the App Store. It gets into the App Store and it's malicious and a bunch of people, there's 1 million downloads. And so, but in particular, when it comes to code repositories and training data, if you can, inject something that's not the way it's supposed to be and doesn't work the way it's supposed to, then you can cause a lot of issues. With the commercial, Gen AI, like ChatGPT, they have so many consumers that are using it now, and Apple just added it to their Apple Intelligence, that your data is not as much at risk because you're in a sea of data, and it's really hard for somebody to poison the well because there's so much data that's already been trained. But yeah, that's a real concern. I do see another question. Quantum computing and banking. I think that the security of banking does rely on cryptography to keep things private. But a real big part of what the big banks are doing, and I'm sure the small ones are leveraging the technology that the big banks develop, is around fraud detection. is just like social engineering. We see so much of they're going to rename the pig butchering to romance peddling or something else because they thought the pig butchering was a term for this social engineering where you get somebody, they think you love them, and they give away their money, and they had it stolen by somebody who doesn't really love them, which would bother me. So I think that quantum computing will give us, some algorithms to use that are, we'll have quantum resistant algorithms to keep things private in the future. And that's still something that's, it's being developed. But I think that the, trust in the financial system comes down most often, and the easiest way to do it is through just outright human fraud. Well, okay, to the point of training data, Michael asks about, do we need to poison the well if the existing training data has vulnerabilities? And maybe that was to something that you were intending, Pinto, that I didn't pick up on. But yes, the training data is likely. Well, I mean, I think the example of Seattle and Las Vegas is a good example. You trained it on something that you thought it was like all times of day and it was great, but it was gray and cloudy and the sun was a lot lower in the sky. And so things were different when they got to, bright Las Vegas with the sun up higher in the sky. And so just like technology, I think you don't always foresee the things that you should have done to make it more of a robust data set. So yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm on a IEEE committee for fake news, Ariel. Ariel has a question, will there be good ways to mitigate fake news? It's a real challenging problem, again, because a lot of this you can't really just regulate it, because we still want to have, at least in the democratic nations, free speech. We don't want to stifle that. At the same time, this technology gets into the hands, of people who are not smart enough to invent the technology, but it's commoditized and they can get a hold of it. I mean, and this is like, ChatGPT is legal. The Sora doing videos is really impressive now. You just give it text and it creates a 30-second video, and this is really amazing. And if you get it, I think Midjourney, you can give it someone's photo and you can say, I want it someone with these features, and it's not going to be perfect, right? I mean, if it is, then you're probably, they probably don't want you to have it be perfect, but it's going to resemble them. And then you can continue to use the same, reference the same model again and again in different situations. And it's just becoming very easy. I really look forward to the day when you can have your kids or grandkids and they go off and it's, oh, they're playing on the computer. No, they're making a whole movie, right? With the technology. They're writing a book. They're designing a game. That was one of the things, AI, you can create a whole playable game that you would have had to buy shrink wrapped in a box in the 90s. And now you can just give the description and it creates a whole world. And so these are really amazing, but it's really hard to rein that in. And so I think there need to be laws and repercussions for abusing the technology. But one of the things I really would like to see more emphasis on is from elementary school on up, getting the kids to understand how to think critically and how to question and how to look up and reference things and go, oh, this is reliable. I'm not just going to buy into it because the social bubble that I live in on social media, on TikTok, is, thinks the same thing that I do, right? You want to get out of that kind of an echo chamber. So, I'm looking at the perception sensors for AV. Bento, what's a perception sensor? So the ability to detect something malicious or an attack, and because we don't really think about it as being AV anymore, right? It's whatever the endpoint protection is, and it's often EDR, MDR, XDR. I think that
Dr.
we're
John,
seeing real benefits to the technology.
I think Michael has something to
Mike?
Michael has something to say, it looks like.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
yes, good evening, Dr. John. I think he's talking about sensors for autonomous vehicles. Just like you talked about. Yeah,
Autonomous vehicles, not antivirus. Okay,
yeah.
that helps to clear that up. Thank you. I think that my view on autonomous vehicles is that we need to have strong standards and interoperability. And so if you have strong standards, then you can have, the street light and the dots in the middle of the road and all the different things. There can be communication so that you really understand your environment in a more robust way, a fuller way than just, one camera, right? Now they've got multiple sensors. And I think it's definitely, we don't have a lot of time to go into it, but it's definitely important to secure these, because you don't want something like a hack to the entertainment system, whether it's a car or a plane, to then affect the drivetrain or the steering, right? Let me just go to the other question that we have so that we can wrap up, since we're just past the hour. With advancements in cybersecurity and AI, what challenges should we prepare for? That's a good closing question. And I'll ask, Bento and Mike to join in. I think, we talked about deep fakes. We talked about synthetic data. You have to think about what would a fraudster do, but it's sometimes the systemic risk isn't the risk from an adversary. It's just the risk that if something goes wrong here and there at the same time, then it's, it's raining.
Catastrophic failure, yeah.
Bento?
Yeah, that can lead to a catastrophic failure, because the more and more you depend on this autonomous systems, and a failure by one system can cascade into other systems, and so that could be a problem. Again, like John, just before the talk, like he said, like as the AI is used for advancing the security, as well as on the other hand, it's also can be used for attacks. So it's more like a cat and mouse game. So it's like who is ahead. So pretty much like, we have to focus on that, and so improve security of AI systems and AI for security. So we need both at the same time.
Well, and the adversaries, if they're coming from a nation state like China or Russia or North Korea or whatever, where they're going to go out there and they're not going to have guardrails, and they're going to develop stuff that's just really weaponized. And so I think that it's important that the good guys in the lab are also creating a sandbox and trying things out and finding out what happens and getting that information. And then it's really a matter of governments and experts have to communicate that more broadly, so that we can know that's something that is a threat, and that we and maybe some recommendations on how to you know, prepare and protect yourself.
Yeah. And some of that involves some of the policy matters as well, just like we do with the nuclear weapons and things of that nature, how we would make sure that deterrence aspects of it would be one way to prevent such attacks from rogue nations and things of that nature.
Well, when you talk about complexity, it really is complex. And when you start to think about all the factors, what if this, what if that, what if that, and then just the difficulty of being an expert in that category because you don't understand that technology. It's advancing so quickly. Only, maybe in some cases it's a few people in the world that really understand that new thing, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just very important to be paying attention and to do threat modeling and to try to relate things that are possible, and at least give them a likelihood and say, okay, the business can make the decision if they're going to spend the money or not. But if you're not a Fortune 500 company, a Global 1000, you may go out of business if something really bad happens, and that could be ransomware. It's not just advanced technologies or global systemic collapse. It's you need to protect yourself and you need to protect your family, and so understanding how things work is really important.
The other risk I could see is as more and more AI deployed, there is no human in the loop. So for instance, if a small business's email is directed to spam folder by Gmail, there is nothing much you can do to prevent that from happening because AI makes the decisions.
Sure.
So,
I mean, that's the algorithm is doing that to help you, and sometimes it gets.
in some cases, that might affect small businesses disproportionately compared to because
But
they
yeah,
are not
I
out
think
there.
important, things that are really important or really high risk need to have a human in the loop.
Yes.
It shouldn't just be, and as a closing thought, go watch again War Games from the early 80s, and you'll see the supercomputer that's playing global thermonuclear war with Matthew Broderick. And that was the premise, was we're going to take people out of the missile silos and we're going to have it all be autonomous. The computer will make the decision. Well, that didn't work out so well.
Yeah. That's a major concern because now if you go to a website, you have to chat with the AI and you won't be able to talk to a human. And so
but if you're not if you're not technically fluent enough or understand it enough to be able to make smart decisions about how you use the technology, right? Then you're going to do things and not even realize that it's not the right thing to do.
Yeah. And that too. And the AI can spill the secrets too, like, talking about another customer too, unless you do access control with an AI. So there's a lot of new things, like John said, that is happening. It's rapidly advancing. And thankfully, there is also some AI to help.
Oh,
So,
I didn't click on the stop share. I just closed the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everybody for attending. All the people who registered will get the link to the video and the slides. We'll email that out. If you don't see it by next week, by Christmas in your stocking, then check your spam folder.
So thank you, John. Happy holidays, everyone. So have a great New Year as well. All right.
All right. Take care. Thank you.